All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is our first panel out of the Esports Professionals Network. If you're not familiar with the Esports Professionals Network, it's a group of almost 500 plus esports professionals, executives, team owners, companies, startups, you name it. Everyone kind of comes together. We talk about things, we discuss, connect, network, and everything in between. To my right, I guess, is Tyler. He is one of our admins for the group, and directly below me is Stan Press, I believe. I don't know if the order is the exact same on my screen as yours, but these guys are both kind of two strong members of the esports community, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Tyler, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Sure. So I'm the CEO of the Electronic Gaming Federation, which is a collegiate esports development company. We do a bunch of media leagues and college program development, which is super fun. Been a mod with EPN for a while, I think since maybe it started, and super excited to be here.
Awesome. My turn?
Yep.
Cool. You guys can hear me? Everything clear?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So my name is Stan Press. I'm the managing director of Maggot Advisors, or Frank Maggot Associates. No, we're not a law firm. We're a strategic consultancy and research firm. Been around in the esports space myself for about 10 plus years. I used to compete back in the day. I actually managed teams back then and still assist a couple teams. I used to actually sponsor teams and leagues back when I used to work at Astro Gaming and Elgato Gaming. So this gives me a wide breadth of experience across all levels, from the player side, management side, sponsor side, league side. And now as a consultant and researcher, I get to actually talk about all those levels.
Awesome. Well, that's probably a lot more than I could have thought about. So that's really awesome.
Of course, I have been practicing that introduction for the last 4 months.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, then you'll be saying it again next Monday or Tuesday, right?
Yeah. You'll hear about the same version of it 10 times over.
Great. And for myself, I am Brandon Nolte. I originally got into esports a couple of years ago, and then I launched a site called esportsentrepreneur.com, where you can find articles on business development, kind of understanding the basics of the esports industry on the business side. And then I also am the owner of the Esports Professionals Network and a few other things that I do. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Our first topic of today is the World Esports Association. Recently got launched by ESL and the corporations of, I guess, about 8 different teams. So with that, do you guys have any kind of strong comments you guys want to get started off on?
Stan, would you like to start
first? A lot of this, we really don't know what they're about terribly just yet. We haven't seen too much official comment. I think there's a lot of speculation going on right now that is really unjustified. We have no idea really what they're planning. There is a high-level thought. There's a high-level initiative. I think people are very excited. People are also very, very scared. We'll see what that happens. We'll see what they're all about once they actually come more forward with more messaging, more direct focus on, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we're all about. They have some of that already. And I think, look at Envious, Microfail, or also known as Hastro, put out a really good blog about what they're really trying to do. So he's someone I really respect in this space, has been a proven leader and a success in esports. If he says something about that, then I have to trust him in a lot of ways. We'll see. But right now, I'm curious. I'm waiting to see what happens. And it's part of the research space and consulting spaces. You don't make snap judgments. You don't jump on Reddit and either add to the shitstorm or, well, actually, no, it was mostly a shitstorm on Reddit anyways. So if anyone could tell me that it wasn't and point out, like, hey, this is something good, then I'd be happy. I'd love to see that. But I'm holding my judgment. I want to wait to see what they really strive to do when they have a mission statement and when they really have something to focus on.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. There's so many speculations out there that I think it's going to be really difficult for them to make a stronger move because they already have that stigma from the community on what they're doing. Some people are like, "Oh yeah, this is amazing," but then you have the other people who are like, "Oh, this is going to be corporate greed. Politics are coming into play," and you're really going to start seeing that kind of movement. However, as a person who
politics coming into play, that's never happened in traditional sports.
No. That's terrible.
Shocking.
NFL,
mind blown.
Yeah. So and I think with the growth of the industry moving so fast, that's just something that people are always going to be worried about. I had a conversation with David Bowman last week about, not necessarily this topic, but just how the esports industry has shifted. It's moving so fast that if we continue to do things the way we do, then we might, just kind of fall into the same pattern that sports have, which might not just be the most successful thing, but it might be this most successful thing. But we're going to have those politics involved, and you're going to have that corporate greed.
Yeah, I think when I first heard about this, my initial reaction was to be optimistic, because I mean, when we talk to investors from my company, deal with people that are kind of outside the space looking in, a lot of the time, the chaos in the professional world comes up. There's a lot of things that kind of go along with that, and I think one of the things that I hope to see from it is kind of that level of stability that like the LCS brings to League of Legends, in kind of a broader sense. I think ESL happens to be one of the people best equipped to take that role just because of their footprint on esports in general. And I think people have legitimate concerns, especially around like the transparency, what is actually going to happen, because as Stan said, we have no idea really. We just have a bunch of kind of vague language that commits them to an idea, but not necessarily the execution of it. I think from what we've seen, you could say a little bit to the various details, but like Stan said, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. And like Red Eye told me on Twitter, like ask a lot of questions, make sure that you're holding accountable throughout the process of kind of its rollout. And then when it comes down to it, it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing. And I think the community has shown in the past that if it turns out to be something bad, that they're pretty good at forcing some sort of correction.
Yeah, I think what you said was really, really on point, that the community really decides this. The community decides if a game is going to be an esport. The community decides if a league is going to be successful. The community overwhelmingly has a lot of power here. We also want to teach the community how to be relaxed. Please relax. That's all I have to say, because there are a lot of powerful teams on there. A lot of people are very much involved that are really excited about this. And yeah, someone pointed in the chat that this was rushed. Well, that's a good question. Was it rushed? I think the poster leak was something that forced their hand in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So that the WISA website popped up a week or two after, and it was still pretty light on details. And the only real comments from any professional or team owner came out of NB.
Yep.
So a lot of that, I think, was... I don't think it was ever supposed to be rushed. I just don't think they were planning to actually ever talk about it this quickly, this fast. That poster leak really set everything off. I don't know if that... I don't consider it a conspiracy. I don't consider that a tease. I think that was legit, because there was nothing else falling from that. There's just, oh, this is a thing. Here it is.
Right.
I really can't say much more than that. I don't think it was rushed. I think it was... They did the best they could considering the circumstances. Maybe they probably could have done better. I think they're still trying to figure out a lot of the plans and a lot of the language. I think it would have been nice to see a more controlled message that, say something like this actually happens. Oh, excuse me. Say something like that actually happens. Again, you need to be prepared for it. You have companies like Activision who are always ready for a Modern Warfare or Call of Duty leak.
Right.
They're used to that. They know that's coming. This kind of stuff does not really happen that often in esports. Sure, there are player leaks, roster leaks. That happens pretty often. This kind of stuff, no, this really doesn't happen. Leagues are usually not prepared for these kind of experiences.
Right. I did have kind of one question on, and not necessarily the rollout of it, but it's the role of WESA or WISA in the context of all the pro leagues that are now in existence. So, for instance, you can argue that Riot with LCS has a pretty solid hold on how that works. Obviously, they've extended that power into all their player contracts and things like that. Blizzard is kind of following the same path now with Overwatch and Heroes and Hearthstone, kind of that area. Do you think because Valve has been so hands off with things like CS:GO that this is either the equivalent for CS:GO, or it's something that's going to be kind of transcendent of all the games and eventually kind of be the world authority, I guess, without making it too expansive or broad-reaching?
A lot of the leaders in the esports industry and space, from the platforms to the leagues, have been trying to figure out a solution around this. Riot does own Everything. They're the IP holder, and they own the experience from end to end. And you see what kind of investment that demands, and you see the quality that it delivers. It works. And they're still showing year-over-year growth. Might not have been as big as this year compared to last, but they're still doing something really well.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of arrangement, this kind of solution, this kind of platform building is really what's going to help create sustainability for games that publishers don't want to own that. Valve has clearly shown that they don't want to own this. They want to make sure that leagues do the work. I don't know what else to say. This is a simple fact. Valve has just said that, hey, leagues get to do this. It's clear that ESL has been doing a great job. DreamHack, MLG actually had the record-holding numbers for CSGO.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that there's going to be some... This is a tough thing to talk about.
Yeah.
I look at this and I think, I have no idea. We don't really have a lot of precedents to go on, because the last time anything like this happened in traditional sports was, what, 30, 50, 100 years ago?
Yep.
That's not a good indicator of what's going to happen.
Yeah. Things have changed so much just from, either the money that's involved or, but when you think about it, like a players association or a players union, I guess would get started in like traditional sports, was started out of, players being extremely fed up with how they were being treated. And, you have the Players Resource Center that is kind of getting in development, which I guess is not necessarily the same thing or the same concept, but when you look at potentially what the value of it, what those associations bring, it's all about the representation and the kind of the spoken word of getting their voice heard. So one thing that I do kind of jumping off track from my conversation there is that all of these teams are EU focused. Do you see, and this is just a speculation, kind of going back to that route, do you think that's going to have a kind of a short-term effect that, oh, hey, these are just the teams that we're talking to right now, but we're planning on, branching out to NA because, whenever you start, something like that maybe might be a little rushed, and then you have the world, kind of put into your title, but you only have EU teams, what does that really say?
Right.
ESL is based out of Europe. Yes, they have a North American branch, and the North American branch is built mostly around content development and having a studio. I imagine that the leadership out of ESL, being that they're European and Counter-Strike is more popular and stronger in Europe, this was a good first round for them.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much of a conspiracy. Again, we have to wait and see. We can only tell if there's a conspiracy once there's some actual indication of that, maybe 6 months down the road, a year down the road, that still no NA teams are part of that or welcome. Whatever that looks like. We don't know.
Yep.
But I think there's an interesting question here from Bowman Shuda that asks around WISA's language of transparency. Are they throwing around the word transparency too much? Guys, someone else take this, otherwise I'm going to talk forever. Which I'm happy to. I like the sound of my own voice. I'm fine with that.
You have the voice of God over there.
I don't know if I've gone that far. I don't like hubris, but I appreciate the compliment. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I think transparency is extremely important. Just because of transparency to a point. I don't think that salaries is something that should be thrown out to every single fan that's out there. Just for the stability of right now, I think within like an internal reasoning, I think transparency should be done within inside its own league just for competitive salaries and that sustainability of revenue sharing. That's just one aspect that they're really trying to look at is that revenue sharing aspect, which I think which kind of goes into our next topic of traditional sports adaptations. Where does WES or WESA WESA really try and find WISA? I don't know what they're.
It depends what accent you have.
WISA.
WISA.
Yeah, I'm going to follow Thord on this one. I think he says WISA.
So where
actually someone check for me.
Yeah. So someone pull up that link and forward it over. But yeah, I think transparency is extremely important, but I don't think it's even back whenever Ember did this back in December. I don't think it was ready. I think it's something that should be internal until the industry has this sustainability. There can't be. I think there's limited knowledge that needs to be out there. But if you're so fragmented, like if the industry is so fragmented that only the tier 2, tier 1 teams are saying, oh, this is what we make. And then these tier 1 teams are like, well, that sucks. We're not going to tell you guys what we're making. So just kind of, where we're at. And I know that Esports Observer they had a newsletter that came out kind of a couple weeks ago. They said they're kind of working on something in regards to showing kind of the financial statements of the kind of what the companies in esports make. If that pans to work out, I think it'd be a really great resource just for the business side and the community. But when we look at players, organizations, what they make outside of their tournament winnings, I think it's just kind of knowledge that can stay within the community and not necessarily branch out to, the fans.
Well, we want to first talk about what kind of transparency. Are we talking about player transparency? Are we talking about ruling transparency? We really want to start specifying what kind of transparency we're talking about.
Agreed.
And this is something that the community needs to police themselves with and to police anyone else who uses the word transparency. This is something we all have to hold ourselves accountable for. I don't want to just simply say, hey, we need to be more transparent. Transparent about what? Player salaries or staff salaries or sponsorship money? No, a lot of that stuff should be private. I do believe in salary transparency because you have that in traditional sports. You have salary caps, you have bonus caps, you have structure that prevents teams from poaching one another. Set periods for this. Riot's actually done a lot of good work with that, and I actually really like that. I think part of the WISA agreements, once we probably learn more, may actually cover a lot of that.
Yeah,
who knows?
I think in general, for me, if a company is committing to transparency, the biggest part is really understanding what that means and sticking to it. So if they decide that like player salaries are something they want to be transparent about, but the other aspects that you mentioned are something they want to keep private, I'm fine with that. I just want to see that there's a plan for it, they understand like what that means, and then they follow through on whatever their commitments are. And I think the circumstances under which they were announced kind of made their entrance into the world a little confusing. And as a result of that, running into a ton of problems with how is the messaging working, like is the marketing on fleek and whatever. So I think
I guess you used on fleek in an actual legitimate like professional discussion. Well, this went to shit just now. Thank you so much, Tyler. That's all your fault.
Well, I'm trying to be a man of the community, but so I think as long as they're kind of figuring that out, it stabilizes, and we'll probably see that over the coming months. Depending on, again, we don't know the circumstances that forced them into this, or if it was planned. I would hope that they ended up like being rushed on this, and this isn't their plan to roll out because it was not good in that sense. But when it comes down to it, like as long as there's consistency in it and they're holding up to the commitments, whatever they turn out to be, I'm sure that it'll kind of be the community will decide, and a lot of us are kind of stuck either way.
Yeah. Well, we really want to create foundations, and this is a great way for ESL to start creating foundations in a space that has none. Valve is taking a hands-off approach. This is creating a great laissez-faire opportunity for multiple parties to profit and actually do great work in CSGO space. You have multiple great tournaments coming up. You have a couple leagues popping up, and you have some hybridization of television content and traditional content. I take that back. Traditional esports content. That's what I mean to say. Mm-hmm. So this is going to be a really exciting year for CSGO. Remember that the esports space is maturing at a rapid pace because we need it. This can't just be community-driven the whole time. Money has to come in. If we want to grow, we need to actually start thinking like real businesses and start looking at how other places do this. Traditional sports is the only place that has any kind of insight into this. Mm-hmm. Is it a one-to-one parallel? Hell no. It's a completely different space in so many ways.
Yep.
But we have also ways to innovate faster and better than the traditional sports. Traditional sports is stuck in a lot of very traditional models, and they make their money that way. But they have to remember that they also have stadiums.
Yeah.
They also travel the world. Sure, players do too, but all we do is rent stadiums, much like a music experience, as opposed to an actual event.
The local economy of esports doesn't exist. When you look at the whole merchandise side of traditional sports, you look at the local economy, you don't find, St. Louis Cardinals gear in Chicago. But, you look at merchandise in the esports industry, one, it's very hardly exists because most teams just do it internally and they don't license it out. I think that teams will start to license out, their products more and more. I think Fnatic does license a few things. I could be 100% sure. I just know they actually have a pretty good product line. But I think there has to be some sort of shift, when it comes to how esports economies work in regards to like their fan base, and it being because it's so fragmented across the entire kind of countries, and a lot of teams don't have a grasp on where their actual fan base is at. So they can't really target. If they're trying to sell something, it's hard to target it outside of their social media base. Their social media base.
You're talking about more about offline and online marketing strategies.
Yeah.
Teams in esports have a real hard time doing anything offline.
Yeah.
Events are about the only thing that they have. So the sooner that teams start realizing that they can leverage both online activations and offline activations, where it's meet and greets or tournaments that are actually at some kind of location like the Esports Arena in Santa Clara. Santa Ana or Santa Clara? I don't remember which one. I got to look that up. Point is, there's the Esports Arena in SoCal, and that's a great opportunity for that. If teams started realizing that they have offline marketing power, then that is something that traditional brands and big brands actually have experience in. They know that, they recognize that, and that starts speaking their language. To take a break from our good running thread, I do want to make sure we answer some of the questions from the chat. There's a question again by Bowman Shuda asking, MTG owns ESL and DreamHack, so why wouldn't DreamHack be a part of this, let alone other leagues? I think with the assumption that ESL and DreamHack are owned by the same parent company, but also remember 2 separate businesses, there might be some overlay. Yeah. We will see again how that turns out. Please, guys, chime in.
Yeah, I also kind of look at it in the sense that if you think about the role that ESL and DreamHack have, ESL has kind of gone into the more like, traditional seasonal format, whereas DreamHack is usually more like the big tournament stuff, whether it's a major or minor type situation. So it could be that they're saying ESL is going to be their league play and look more like the NFL perhaps, while DreamHack is kind of staying in their major produced type scenarios, in which case it wouldn't necessarily make sense for them to take part in whatever is going on there. The difference might be, again, like how that affects the major system, how it goes into the other games and things like that. So that's my theory on it right now, but I mean, who knows?
Well, we also remember, probably somebody in the audience was also DreamHack also, and I was there and I got a chance to experience it. Great event, really well put together, especially for a first time. They actually leveraged a lot of North American LAN talent that I was running into people I haven't seen in years at events. And it was really cool to see people from, used to work on PAX LANs, used to work at Intel LAN Fests. Really, really great reminder, like, wow, this space is still alive and well, and there's a lot of growth to it. I look at DreamHack as more of a festival, and there's actual vendor area. There are more things to do. There's a LAN area that actually still sold out 2,000 seats at Austin, and Montreal's looking to be bigger, I hope. I look at that as more of a festival-like experience, and I look at ESL events like a show-like experience, more traditional sporting events, where you go to watch a tournament, you buy some merch, you buy concessions, you're in and out.
Agreed.
Yep.
I hope that answers your question, Bowman.
Yeah.
Remember, because DreamHack is a separate company still, they're able to also sell more sponsors and different sponsors. They can also profit some things that ESL may not, just because they have different offerings. Right. This also gives them the opportunity to target other cities. That's why I didn't see DreamHack in the West Coast, because there's a ESL San Jose. This is why you see Montreal, not New York or Boston, because ESL's in New York and covers that part of the Northeast. This is a great diversification play, and this empowers both companies to do really, really well.
Agreed. And I also saw a question from Dill about Andy Miller from Energy using his arena for esports tournaments when we were talking about offline venues. And I think that kind of segues into the next topic about traditional sports and esports integration. So do we want to switch into that and start answering those questions, or do you want to keep going on this?
I just want to make sure we covered all the questions first before that.
Did I miss them?
Who's Pylorison? Who's Katarina?
From League of Legends?
Yeah, I don't think it's a cat from League of Legends, but Lars, please follow up with that so we know what you're talking about, or if that's just a joke. I completely flew over my head.
Tim Bauer.
On to Well, let's answer Dill's question then. I think that's an interesting one about the offline events in sports. I've actually had a couple conversations with Andy, and he's a real smart, savvy guy. And it would make sense to leverage that stadium, that experience. It also makes sense to leverage all of the strengths that the Sacramento Kings have.
Mhm.
To not do that would be a disservice to esports, a disservice to that investment. Is this now a situation where they're trying to build up a fan base, trying to build up an audience before they really try to go to any brands that they work with? That makes sense. We'll see. Energy has not really done anything with major sponsors yet. And I think most has just been one split. And they survived. But maybe they want to figure out how they can do better. Maybe they want to figure out how to build more of a fan base first. There's a lot of cool things that could happen to that team and that organization in that time.
Yeah. And I would say kind of in general, it's you start to see more people like Rick Fox getting into it, like West Ham getting into FIFA, or today SO4 getting into the Elements League of Legends spots. I'm sure that you'll see a lot more from a brand leveraging standpoint, kind of whether it's the use of their physical stadium, their social media presence that already exists. I mean, like SO4's team already has a crazy amount of Twitter followers. And kind of that level of things. So I have no doubt in my mind that it'll probably be a crossover, especially if you own a stadium and you're trying to fill it, because you can only have so many matches for traditional sports each week. So I'm sure that you'll kind of see more bandwidth being used in that sense.
Well, that's why League of Legends and LCS got their own studio altogether, so they can own the experience end to end. You also got to remember that the Barclays Center in Brooklyn is hosting an event. You have the Madison Square Garden hosting events. You have Staples Center in LA hosting events.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the bigger stadiums are starting to get savvy to this because they have a lot of open seats.
Yeah. And you can
fill that. You got to fill that somehow.
Yeah.
If you're trying to build your money from one event to another event, and you have a whole week in the middle of it that's completely open, or multiple weeks completely open, you are just spending so much money on maintenance and not actually profiting. That's a dangerous way to run a business.
Absolutely. When you look at, the cost of utilization and, if you're only having people in your stadium once a week throughout the entire year, or 2 or 3 times a week, that's, 4 or 5 days that you're not utilizing that space. That's when you go down, if you look at, if you want to get into the retail side of the business, it's how much money can I make per square foot? And I think the same concept will go towards these stadiums that people kind of try and localize. And if Energy is able to kind of localize that market and really kind of say, hey, Energy is this city's team, that has so much power. That if he can establish that, I think there's a lot of power there, especially when going down to building up your own brand name. So I'm actually really interested to see how the local economy is built around it, and not necessarily used maybe as like the actual stadium used for esports events. But I'm really interested in seeing the local economy benefiting from it, or utilizing that at least local economy.
Mm-hmm. I really hope so. I really want to see that. I think that a regionalization play for teams and leagues is really the next step on how to grow. Again, that offline leveraging of their power and strength is going to be a huge selling point that is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than their online promotional capabilities. We have another question from Tim Bauer, 27, asking, doesn't a huge portion of traditional sports money come from TV, advertisements, etc.? Well, the answer is absolutely. They have a system in place, a foundation that's been working really well, making a lot of people money across all different levels for the last 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
They have. Exactly. Oh, go ahead.
They have that. They have that system in place. When you look at the distribution of revenue from the revenue sources, when you compare it from esports to traditional sport, there's no comparison. You have that. There is a clear line that says, selling the rights to their media is like one of their major resources for bringing in revenue. Sponsorships is also another big area, but I think media rights is the number one. I had to double check the statistics for it, but I'm pretty sure media rights is the number one resource revenue for them. So trying to really develop that area, I think over the next 2 years, esports will start to begin to utilize the media rights. But it's something it's very difficult to do because of it's always on Twitch. So where does the value come? Is Twitch going to have to start buying these leagues to broadcast on? And I guess that goes into our third topic, if you will. but where the Facebook Live comes into play. That was just I was thrown off that Facebook Live would be streaming esports, but these people are going to start companies are going to start paying leagues to stream on their service, and I think that's kind of the next big step on where we see esports kind of heading.
Well, you look at this and you hear about how Twitter won the rights to stream an NFL game, and Facebook didn't. Yep. So now this is Facebook coming and say, "Hey, we got the next hottest thing," and Activision is saying, "Hey, we're working on the biggest platform on the planet."
Yeah, it's kind of hard to beat.
So it's a lot of. Oh, go ahead, please. Again, I don't want to.
I was going to say, I think they just snapped up Snoopy, so they definitely have some big names helping them execute on that properly, at least on the Facebook side of it. And then obviously, Activision's gone pretty crazy with all the stuff that they're planning to do around esports to make sure that they're not left behind. So I think that you'll see a pretty interesting combination of kind of like bidding wars around the rights to certain things if they're not directly integrated with a developer. You'll see kind of like if you think of Twitch or Facebook or somebody kind of like the ESPN bidding for rights as a network. And however that ends up is going to be really interesting to me because you get into a lot of questions about who owns media rights technically, like is it the developer, is it the league owner, does it carry over? And, the international aspect of that makes it even more complicated. So not being an expert in that, I'm really interested to watch how that's kind of sussed out between all the major companies.
Yeah, I look at what Facebook and Twitter are doing, and you have a lot of big media companies that are trying to get into video now. And they have a lot of money behind it. They recognize that esports has some of the highest engagement numbers ever seen. So I also want to say, hey, Activision's not being left behind. You look at what MLG has done, 1.3 million concurrent viewers with their last CSGO major. That's not being left behind. That's very much leading the pack.
Yeah.
So everything that was announced at their new front on, I think it was Thursday. I was actually there for that. And it was really exciting to see that they have such a huge focus on content delivery. We'll see how the esports report competes with all the other analyst reports. I think Daily Dot has one. Machinima has one now. IGN's had one for a little bit. But ESPN has more editorial than video content. Yahoo Esports has a good blend of the both. It's going to be really interesting to see actually how the different media partners start working into play. How much relevance do they have in the space? Because just as many competing leagues are coming into the space, just as many competing games are getting into the space, and platforms now, and distribution. Also media. I'm going to be really excited to see in a few years who's left and who's standing. It's going to be ESPN Esports, Yahoo Esports, Instant Esports, maybe Machinima and IGN and Daily Dot end up having more authenticity and last longer. Who knows?
Yeah, I think you'll kind of see that being who has enough diversity to weather downturns and interest in esports, stuff like that. So, I mean, I root for, the smaller companies like Esports Observer and PvP Live and some of the other ones that have been intermittent, but don't have like the same sort of backing that an ESPN or a Yahoo does, even though you could speak to the interesting situation that Yahoo's in. So yeah, I'm really interested to see how they consolidate, whether or not people just start buying authors or contributors from other ones, or if you end up being one of those situations where even the leagues start to more vertically integrate into their media. Because I mean, all the tournament organizers are kind of forced to handle a lot of their own logistics in that sense, and so they might even integrate further into that. So I'm really interested to see how that gets spread around.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue to a really good question by Cakeman B. Let's try to get through these questions quicker so we can be more engaging. This is a lesson we can learn from Twitch streams. Cakeman B asked a really good question about having a single governing body that breaks into different games or multiple groups similar to the NBA, NFL, etc. Let's make this one quick and try to have really strong but direct answers. Brandon, you've been quiet for a little bit. Now, why don't you step up? And why don't you unmute yourself?
Sorry, I didn't step off. Ready for the next question?
No, yeah, it's a great discussion talking about different governing bodies for different esports games. Does that make the most sense? Give us something here.
I'm half and half on this. I worked with the World Esports Council whenever that kind of blew up early in January. I'm no longer working with them now, but I kind of went over with few different options as I consulted with them a little bit, and what I found was that it's very difficult, no matter which way you go. If you want to have a governing body just for League of Legends, there's a lot of things going on there. You're not working with just one league. You're working with ESL, with IEM, ESL. You're working with Riot. Same with CS:GO. You're going to be working with the Turner people. You're going to be working with ESL. It's honestly just really, really freaking difficult. And if you want to have one governing body that kind of is the overseer of all esports titles ever, you run into a lot of difficulties there because not each esports has its own community. It has its own way of doing things. It has its own understanding. There's so many factors, if you will. Like League of Legends and CS:GO, they're the two most popular esports out there right now, and they're both done completely different. Just by one, the game is played differently. It's best of 5 League of Legends. CS:GO, I really don't understand from a competitive side, but I do know that there's the maps and the whole things. So it's different. And then you look at the fighting game community. That something I don't have a lot of education on, but I know it's also extremely different, just because it's a one-on-one type thing. The economy is different, and it's just I think personally, I think it's going to be something that there's going to have to be somebody kind of like the World Esports Association that has kind of a set regulation on, these are the basic standards. But there's so many things that have to get adapted to each game. At the end of the day, I think there should be certain standards set that each league follows, but they have to be adapted to the title. The NBA and the NFL, they don't fall underneath. There is no umbrella company or umbrella, association that they fall under. When one thing happens in the NFL, the NBA will be like, okay, let's look at it. Is it something that we see that could happen? If it does happen, then, if we think it will happen, let's, go ahead and be proactive about it and make that change. But if they think it's not something that's going to be relevant, then, there's no need for them to make that change. And I think that's just something that, each league is going to have to learn from each other. And that's just, I think that's common business. If I'm Coca-Cola and I'm Pepsi and I see Coca-Cola's doing something that I should be doing, I'm going to be jumping on that train. And I think that's a direction that, these leagues and these associations that are forming need to kind of be proactive about.
Yeah. This is a really good segue to talking about the PRC. Duel now. Duel. Okay, cool. Duel asks, what do you think the PRC should be doing to attempt to create transparency in esports leagues that are operated and managed by developers and publishers?
Yeah. If I could jump in on that.
Yeah, please.
I was going to say, what I was going to answer to Brandon's input on it, I think that it's going to be very difficult for all the leagues to come together under one council of sorts. So I think that it kind of opens up an opportunity for something like PRC to be like a third-party auditor, where they can kind of transcend the political, in a sense, at least, situations that everything's going in. So if they're successful, then it kind of focuses on the things that should be standardized, which are like player rights, player contracts, things that are kind of what you could call like the human rights equivalent of esports. And for the individualized things, like Brandon said, you're going to see all sorts of different rule sets. So I think through their education and their proactive stuff, and if they can somehow get a seat at the decision-making table around some of the more major leagues, then it's really a good opportunity for them, and certainly a better way to improve, hopefully, the conditions of esports in general, and kind of see how that transitions from now into the future.
Got it. Anything else we want to answer around the PRC? There's a couple of thoughts here in the chat, particularly one around. Oh, sorry, too many chats going on. Keeps on throwing me back down. I try to scroll up.
I thought there was actually supposed to be a list of questions, and I don't see it.
Yeah, I want to kind of make sure questions pop out separately. We'll have to give Bob a lot of feedback.
Yeah, no, definitely. So Tim Bauer has.
Yeah, you got that one, Brandon. You see that one.
So how does money coming in get to the players? Right now, it feels like the teams aren't really pulling in much money.
Yeah, I think in general that ends up being a sponsor's thing, and it goes to the team, and then the tournament winnings go to the players, and like it varies from team to team, and all the constructs are kind of different. And between games, sometimes they're even different. So how that standardizes is probably going to be kind of one of the next big issues. And I mean, you've already seen things like what Bryce brings up whenever he talks about different things, and a whole bunch of huge influencers in the space.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, well, I
revenue
think
sharing.
you. Yeah, no worries. Let me just get this out real quick. In particular, you make the comment that teams aren't bringing in much money right now, and the truth is that you're right. There's a lot of holding on to, like, a lot of big brands that traditionally sponsor traditional teams. They're kind of waiting. They're in a holding pattern right now to see what they want to do with esports teams.
Yep.
This is a big thing. A lot of teams are still running lightweight and are trying to do what they can with minimal resources, do the most they can to make sure that the players come first.
Right.
I have not ran into many orgs that are successful that don't have the players come first. They don't prioritize their salaries, their comfort, their happiness, their infrastructure. That's getting more and more. That's getting much more expensive.
Yep.
All these leagues coming in, bringing in spots and franchising spots, or whatever that looks like, with traditional sports money or investor money. That's changing up the space because the investor money usually have a 2-3 year game plan. No, a lot of the traditional esports teams, they try to survive the year.
Yeah. Yeah, it's much more volatile just in general because, I mean, of the way relegation works and the whole major minor thing, and like the performance of the team can be significantly more inconsistent than something you'd find in like basketball or football. So there's so many different factors that play into it that they're more kind of coming from my own experience. They behave a lot more like a startup does, even if they're a well-established team kind of operating over several years. So I think once larger brands like, for instance, Budweiser getting into it and going much harder on it could be a huge influencer on that. And you'll see everything kind of standardized over time. And like we keep saying that, or I keep saying that anyways. So I think a lot of it's sort of like we've only really seen this major growth over the last like 7 or 8 years. So there's so much to be kind of sorted through still because we're, comparing it to like the NFL, who's been around for over a century and kind of, still figuring out those issues. So I'm hope that it improves everything and doesn't end up being kind of like what people fear it to be in terms of like a corporate money grab type thing.
Yeah, I agree. So next question, just because I want to get to as many questions as we can before we run out of time. Kickman, his name is Blaine Bell. I know him personally through Slack group. Should there be a governing body for smaller organizations, such as Tier 2, I'm assuming? How does a team enter the professional space?
Is that 2 questions?
Yeah, I think so. So I guess the
Let's
first
go
one.
with the first one.
So should there be a governing body for smaller organizations as well?
I think there needs to be, because this way smaller organizations can support one another. This could be as simple as, hey, let's not overlap one another. Let's support one another. You need to kind of create an infrastructure of this minor league, if you will. That could be everything from scheduling to sharing and pooling resources. Smaller leagues are going to run smaller events and probably less often. Maybe more often, who knows? I imagine they probably run lightweight. So again, they could share resources, they could share staff, they could share sponsors. They might be able to come together and bring multiple sponsors, a combined package that actually brings in more sponsorship dollars that goes to support multiple of these smaller leagues. Who knows? I think it would be really smart. I don't think it should be more of a governing body, but more of a alliance or council that supports all these together.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really kind of good idea, kind of trying to bring all that together because, with Esports Entrepreneur, I don't really necessarily work with more Tier 1 teams because they seem to have more of their shit together. But with the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 teams, which I do more talking with, what I've seen is that, they're always like, I don't have money, I don't have anything. And, at the end of the day, being able to pull in your resources, by partnering with, a Tier 2 organization that's kind of a little bit higher up there, but, willing to make sure that everyone can stay competitive on that level and hopefully, kind of really grow things up. I'm a firm believer that, when you unite kind of the global cause of what things are going on, people will come together. Even if you're competing against each other at the same day, there's so many things you can be doing together. You see the same things happening with universities. With the, I guess the best example is the League of Legends collegiate community. There's so many. If you're in the Facebook group for that, there is conversations all the time, just talking about, hey, this is what our club's doing. Maybe you can help out. Maybe you can learn from what we're doing. And I think at the end of the day, you guys, tier 2 isn't making enough money to be financially stable. I think there's a lot of growth in that area. Teams are making enough money to, pay the bills and do things like that. But, obviously they don't have money to pay, a CEO, a social media manager, everyone in between. But if you're able to unite things and do things or outsource just for a little bit of money here and there, I think there's a lot of potential to grow tournament sizes and maybe even foster that growth.
We talked about two things I want to highlight. The first is how great the esports community is at supporting one another. All the colleges that talk about all the success that they've had and all the challenges that they had, that only helps everyone else. And we need to keep encouraging that. We need to keep encouraging discussions and holding everyone to a high standard. And as I said before, wait to react. I'll always say that. The other thing that I liked about what you said was sharing of resources is so critical. That is how you compete against the bigger orgs. But also, what do you do differently? Right now, I just see a lot of copycats and not a lot of trying to create their own original content, original spin on things. Yeah, sometimes it's going to be really difficult to create an original spin because people's expectations are, I came for this kind of content, I want that. But maybe you do better production, or maybe you focus on an editorial content, or maybe you do follow-up content. Something has to be different to give focus and attention to your tier 2, whether it's a league or team or tournament. All of that has to stand out against something. How else are you going to drive attention and viewership? I just hope you do it in a way that doesn't shit on someone else and doesn't leverage drama to do that. It just should be good quality content. So maybe it is a path of like, hey, we're just going to do things well and do things in a professional as possible manner, and hope that takes us somewhere, which is a very valuable approach. I think that actually is what set off a lot of leagues to their current success. Look at ESL and DreamHack. They're there because they did something really, really great and kept on doing it and kept on getting better and better at it. And now they're the best in the field.
Agreed.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you'll kind of see either a convergence or a divergence of the companies that exist currently and are in the process of forming and kind of doing a variety of things, because in the general of like business case studies, like one or the other happens. So you see a lot of like really specialized things that have very unique focuses that are allowed to work together and integrate well as partners or whatever. Or you'll see a convergence where someone comes in and buys all of them, or they all fail out and do whatever. So I think we're in the chaos and turmoil portion of that lifespan. So I think probably within the next 5 years, we'll have a much stronger scene. And then you'll have the whole potential of like another shakeup, because if all the games that are currently popular like suddenly die out, then you have to figure like, is someone going to replace them? If no one's around to replace them, what happens to all the companies that are organizers or platform providers or whatever, and then kind of that whole thing. But that's like a whole crazy conversation, so I won't get into it.
No worries. That's a good conversation to have for another list.
Yeah,
I think there's another question from Any Key Hunt. And to quote, speaking of dangerous ways to run a business, to play devil's advocate, what happens if these multi-million-dollar LCS challenger spots end up not being worth it? I think it's a really good question that we are not really sure if we actually identify the true value of teams, of players, of personalities, of staff, of anything yet. We don't know. Again, we have no real indicators of this. We have no history of this. A lot of this is defining this right now. We could find out in a year or two. By then, we'll actually have some concept of what is your value, what is your revenue, and attaching a overall appreciation of that. We don't know yet. Again, I say that because, and that's a repeating pattern. We don't know. And I say that because, well, the truth is we don't. And to assume that you do would be, that'd be shitty. That'd just hold you back. That's low. I don't want to assume anything. I want to learn. I want to adapt. I want to be flexible, and I want to see the space grow. And I hope that investors see that the same way. I hope that investors have a 2-3 year plan or a 3 to 5 year plan, so that they come into the space and say, okay, I'm not going to throw $1 million, $2 million away for 1 or 2 years. No, some investors have that money and they'll happily say, okay, no worries, business loss, chalk it up. That happens all the time. And that's fine. Some people just want to test the waters. I'm totally okay with that.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think, I think one of the biggest concerns that I have is that, there is, I think, some people think, oh man, someone paying $1 million for an esports team, that's outrageous. I think there is like almost an inflational value from like a fan side being like, you're only gonna make that if you win tournaments. And I think the obvious answer to that is, it's not always the case. And I think you're absolutely right. There needs to be that 2 or 3 year plan in place where, it's like, okay, the first year I'm working on just making the thing stable. And then the second year I'm going to focus on, the secondary resource or secondary revenue areas. So sponsorships, working on a merchandise line, really finding where I can drag that money in there. As long as I can make sure that my, seed or my initial capital is going to last me throughout the first year and make sure that the team is still going to be in that league. I think the obvious answer to what you said is, we just don't know. At the end of the day, we can't predict the future. And I think if Mark Cuban wants to come in here and invest, then that's great for him. But, he's not, he knows he's not going to get a return for 4 or 5 years. And I think that's just the value until the industry starts to do more revenue sharing. It finds more ways to generate revenue and it hits that 1 billion mark, we're not going to see a return for teams. It's just something that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think right now a lot of the teams have value because Riot says they have value. So like, that there's standardized value range for an LCS spot, for challenger spot, at least in some theory. And I think a lot of the teams are still labors of love. And I mean, like Stan said, most of them operate super light. And it's just because that's the way things are. So it's kind of, again, one of those things where, like Stan keeps saying, we just don't know. So I'm certainly certain that something will happen as a tipping point, whether it leads to the demise of the industry or like hypergrowth or, something in that field. It'll be interesting to kind of see where values go from there.
Well, I really want to stress, what are some previous indicators of success? What drove something like this in the past that you can learn from? A lot of what we're doing is new ground. The fact is esports really blew up because of platforms like Twitch and video distribution.
Right.
That's never really happened before. All the attempts at creating leagues, such as the Championship Gaming Series, trying to push down television, didn't work because people from television didn't really want to watch this content. But again, because gamers are so engaging, we decided that, hey, we want this, we'll make this happen on our own. Then we do this. And this is done on platforms like Justin TV, excuse me. And no one even knew what that was 5 years ago. They had a smart enough idea to pivot and focus directly on gaming, and look where they are today. Look how many other people are wanting to get involved in that space. YouTube got involved in that space. Facebook just got involved. We'll see if Twitter makes a play. I just know that they have a Twitter gaming account now, and they're taking that very seriously. I don't see a gaming at Facebook solution. I just see Facebook being Facebook, and then Activision hopefully doing something there.
Right.
Yeah, I think Facebook is.
We don't know.
Yeah. So this has been a
continue.
great. Yeah, no, well, I was just gonna probably start wrapping things up here, but I think with Facebook, it's like I'm interested. I think that
Why did you call
Facebook
it
has
Facebook, because that was his original name.
the Facebook. I think the Facebook actually does have a really good position to do some cool things with esports, but and the reason I say that is because the ability to share that live stream is going to be, I think, what makes it or breaks it. I think with Twitch, you're limited to Twitch people pretty much. If you're not a Twitch viewer, you typically don't go to Twitch. It has that very loyal community, but with Facebook, I think the ability to try and kind of divert your traffic and really bring in someone new to what kind of esports is, I think that's what might be the kind of the thing that Facebook does and really kind of makes it successful. But you're also going to lose traffic on Facebook because there's the people who are loyal to Twitch or Zubu or Hitbox or whatever they're watching it on. So I think Facebook is going to do really well when trying to bring in new people to watch it. I don't think they're going to have as engaged content, but I do think that it'll be successful to a certain point. But I still don't know.
We'll see.
Agreed.
All right, we have a few minutes left. Do we have any last-minute questions from the community here that we can tackle in a few minutes?
Well, Tim Bauer did ask a question. Does anyone know how the NA viewership in terms of esports, particularly in terms of League of Legends CS:GO? I'm not sure
Viewership
if I
in
understand the
what?
question.
Yeah, Tim,
I'm
can you
not sure if
try
I
again,
understand
please?
the question.
I like that in terms of tacos or pizza. I go for tacos personally.
Depends on
why
where
is
I am.
sushi- I really want sushi, so I guess
Oh,
that's
that's
not.
fair. That's fair. Sushi sounds really good too.
So
If
I-
anyone has other questions. Okay, so Tim replied, basically, how do the numbers stack up against traditional sports? So, judging from what we've seen, the biggest event with esports was about 1.3 million concurrents, and that was CSGO. I think League of Legends finals generally trend better where they hit 8 or 9 million concurrents, but that's a more global number.
Yeah.
And that's on multiple different platforms. That's from Twitch, YouTube, Azubu, and a number of Asian platforms that I'm not 100% familiar with.
Yep.
So at that point, we start looking at the total overall broadcast views as well. How many people watch that content live and afterwards? There are some numbers on this. I gotta really dive into them and make sure that, excuse me, that they're legit, so I can actually reference them. Rumor has it that we beat out NHL numbers. We take the best of esports. We beat out an average NHL viewership.
Yeah. In terms of championship viewership, we outrank globally the viewership for the Stanley Cup. So it's pretty good, but those numbers are also kind of hard to compare just because of how they're measured and where the audiences come from. But that's roughly the par that I've seen used compared in industry reports and sort of industry-wide from who I've talked to.
So I think this is the year we're going to start seeing us actually compete against more traditional sports. But remember, we're not going to be beating football or basketball just yet. Pretty cool if we could. So tell all your friends.
Yeah, until that day. But who knows? Maybe I think over the next couple of years, I think esports will continue to grow as always. So I want to say thank you guys to Tyler and Stan. I'm glad you guys were able to make it out here. If any of you guys will be at the Busy Esports Conference on Monday and Tuesday of next week, be sure to hit us all up. We'll all be out there. As always, communicate in Slack, talk to people. We'll always be there, always online. I'll be more active over this next week as I'm, currently not in school and I am, have more free time. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone. Next week's panel may be up in the air yet. I don't know because I will be out in LA. So I still got to figure out the logistics of that. So, but otherwise, thank you guys so much. Yeah, absolutely. We can always just sit in a hotel room and, talk. So thank you guys. And if you guys have any questions, be sure to throw them over in Slack and we'll get the next topic for next week set up. All right. Thank you guys.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Cheers.
Bye, guys.